The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. My name is Oak and I'm your host. Today's episode is a little bit special because I'm letting you behind the scenes of the No More Heroes Mythic Masculinity Summit of 2025. This episode is going to feature the opening panel discussion of our summit. This discussion features myself, Reko Vitae, Deus Fortier, Soma Miller, and Nick Palladino-King, looking at what men need today. This conversation kicked off our 5 days of this Mythic Masculinity Summit, and all of the summit is actually available for free for you to listen to in the links in the video description and the show notes of this episode. All you have to do is enter your email and you'll be able to watch all 5 days, 12 speakers, and 10 hours of rich, mythic, masculine content. With that being said, enjoy the opening panel. Welcome, everyone, to the first No More Heroes Men's Summit. For those who I have not yet met, my name is Oak Mountain. I was born and I reside in Mohkinstsis, also known as Calgary, on the land of the Treaty 7 people. This is the Siksika, Blackfoot, Kainai, Blood, Piikani, Pagan, Stoney Nakoda, and Tsuut'ina Sarsi peoples. I personally carry the blood of the Narwhan, the Gale, and the Mi'kmaq. I would not be here today if it were not for a long line of grandfathers and grandmothers, brothers, sisters, and friends. I raise my voice in gratitude to all of my kin who have come before, and I pray that the work we do this week will serve our kin yet to come. I'm deeply humbled to all who have chosen to participate in this week's summit, and I give special thanks to each and every presenter who will generously offer their time and wisdom for our collective good. And this brings me to the intention of today's summit. I'll assume that if you're here, you're interested in the development of conscious masculinity within yourself, your relationships, and the culture at large. It's no secret that there is a great dis-ease among men today. From the opening of this circle now to our close on Friday evening, about 6,100 minutes will pass, which means roughly 2,000 men will take their lives by the time we finish on Friday. This is worldwide. Our work here this week comes in part from my own refusal to allow this crisis to continue as it is. This violence that men inflict does not end with themselves, but it does start there. And what I mean by this is that each man has the opportunity to reconcile his relationship with his capacity for harm, anger, despair, and hatred. But in order to do so, he must be equipped with at least some wisdom, some tools to be able to identify and meet the shadows of himself and of his past. We are failing to equip men and boys to do this because the main technology that would strengthen the spirit of men today has been lost, profaned, and diminished nearly beyond recognition. This is the technology of myth. But before we dive into the panel discussion today, I will offer a chance to each guest to introduce themselves. So may we grow ever wiser in our stewardship of each other and this earthly home. Thank you. I'll turn the floor over, Deus, if you would like to start.
Yes, thank you so much, Oak, for organizing all of this. This is really important and powerful work, and it's a big task to take on to organize something like this, and I really appreciate that. Appropriate use of volition that is largely lacking in a big way in our culture. So thanks for having me here. My name is Deus Fortier. I've been a professional facilitator for about 10 years and an explorer of consciousness and psychotherapeutics and shamanism and men's work for much longer than that, probably about 26 years or so of my own personal explorations. My wheelhouse is mostly in shamanic principles and practices. I work with psychedelics, also trained in body-centered psychotherapeutics, trauma-informed facilitation. And men's work is largely becoming the bulk of my work. It's something that I'm intensely passionate about because it's something that I have needed in my own life. Noticeable lack of any initiatory experiences growing up wreaked havoc in many areas of my life. In addition to sexual trauma, growing up created these barriers of connection and intimacy that led to many, many years of loneliness and depression. And so just recognizing that I stepped into this work out of a need within myself, and to be witness to the transformational potential of when we gather together as men to reveal that which has been hidden and to step into more complex, mature expressions of our potential is probably the most powerful thing that we can do at this particular stage on our planet. So I've leaned more and more into it. My colleague and collaborator is Ian McKenzie. Some of you may have heard of him. He spearheads the Mythic Masculine. We've been running retreats for men for about 2.5 years now. We have 2 levels of retreats, as well as online programs and an online community space. So thanks for having me here. I'll be speaking here on the panel as well as on Wednesday for the lover archetype, which is one of the archetypes that we focus on in our in-person retreats.
Thank you so much, Deus, for being here and for sharing the work that you do with the world. Reko, please.
Yeah, thanks, Oak. That was a really beautiful introduction and very moving. Like the place that desire comes from, I think, is such a powerful place to move through the world. You know, that desire to see something better for men, not just see the problem, but to have a vision for what could be. That's what, you know, gives a space like this something, you know, really enticing to be a part of.
We lost your audio, Reko.
Apologize for that.
All good.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. So my work, I've been involved in men's work for about 7 years now. Yeah, something's going on with my mic. If it cuts out, I apologize. I'll try to fix it once I'm off here. So I've been running weekly men's groups for about 5 years with my brother Manu. We're located in Victoria, BC. Our groups are called the Mystic Heart Men's Circles. And yeah, we've been exploring what men really need. And that's kind of the question that's been driving us for the past 5 years in those groups, is what do men need? And we continually ask that question and continue to get more and more answers out of it. Yeah, we also do breathwork events. We do poetry nights and all sorts of events where men can get together and really express their spirit. And one thing that we found is, like, there's a lot of emphasis on supporting men, and then once men get that support, it unlocks so much creative potential. So I think what I'm really excited about bringing into the world is supporting men to actually create something for themselves, create something for the world. That's why I'm here. I'll be speaking later today with Manu about myth and brotherhood and how to build deeper relationships between men. And then I'll be speaking on Friday about the king, the archetype of the king, and castration, spiritual castration in men. So
thank you so much, Reko. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here, brother. Nick, please.
Brad, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. Oh, appreciate it. Always good to be around you and other men. Good to meet you as well. Nick Palladino-King. I have had an interesting journey into the world of spirituality and men's work. I never planned on being in this work. I started my career in corporate, wanted to be nothing more than a rich, powerful CEO, and found myself just becoming an absolute asshole. And that's kind of what initially started to wake me up to myself and realizing that, you know, I wasn't happy with my own being, and more so than happy in the way I was showing up in the world. So actually that led me into exploring myself through yoga and meditation and breath work. Eventually for me to leave my corporate career and travel and really understand who I wanted to be in the world. And a lot of that work culminated in me becoming a yoga teacher, a coach, a mentor. And part of the work that's got me into men's work is about maybe after 10, 15 years of being kind of the only man in the room in yoga trainings and especially in more advanced yoga teacher circles. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was in a training and there were no men in the room. And it was a really powerful female teacher and lovely women. And this source hit me of the question of where are the men? And that source question came to me and through me, and it really kind of shocked me into saying, wait a second, why am I the only man in this room? Where are the men, and especially where are the mindful men? And that actually led me to creating a men's group called the Mindful Man, in which we do work like this. We talk about what it is to be a man in today's world, a lot of our struggles, and specifically not through a way of building men up to break women down, because that is such a narrative out there in men's work. And it's quite the opposite. It's actually getting men back into the room and back into the conversation. And I guess more importantly, back into themselves so they can step into their own power. And that's a lot of what I've seen in the men's world is a need for men to step back into their own power and be present. Because as Oak mentioned, 70% of suicide is male. That means men are literally exiting. They're exiting this world, not even just the conversation. So that's where a lot of my passion for men's work lives and lies is let's get men into the room. Let's get them into the conversation and help them feel safe to open up and explore their masculinity and also their femininity, which is what I'll talk about tomorrow on my talk around the spiritual warrior. What does it mean to be a masculine man in this world, and how do we show up in a way that does that nurtures us and supports rather than destructs? So super excited, guys. You already got me rolling. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. It's fantastic. Appreciate you being here and for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Likewise.
Soma, please.
All right. It's really good to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Oak, and just all the efforts to put this together and your powerful intention. Yeah, it's it's always exciting for me when I see more and more men kind of coming online to bring this work into the world in whatever form that they're called to do it. I didn't necessarily intend to end up here leading men's work, but it's been a big part of my life for over a couple of decades. Somehow I got called into working with men in my early 20s, and it was such a transformational process for me to be in the space with other men where I could really be held, be seen, and be supported in a way that I didn't feel like was available to me as a man from other men. And really that's where I've tried to take this forward as a leader, as somebody offering this work, is creating those kinds of containers where men can really show up, and not necessarily step into a specific definition of this is what it means to be a man, but to really tune into what that is for them personally, and allow that unique transmission of manhood to come through them. And really that's been what I've offered over the last 8 years as I've done this professionally. Maybe it's a bit longer now, because I don't pretend to fully know myself. Like, even though that's the question that brought me into this work, like, what does it mean to be a man? And to me, there's this beautiful space of discovery that opens up when we can just kind of live into those questions. And I think the sort of constraints around masculinity and like these kind of rigid definitions are actually what causes a lot of men to suppress and have these shadow expressions. So my work is really to try to be an invitation for men to tap into that natural integrity of being that can come through when we give ourselves that kind of space. And so, yeah, and that's kind of somewhat of the topic that I'll be speaking to on Friday, which is around emergent leadership. So it's working with this phenomena of nature called emergence and how we can create those kind of conditions for life to move through us in such a way that what has never been can come into being. And I really feel like that's what's called for in this time, in this transitional point in our history, our soon-to-be history. Just the space where we can kind of rest in that unknown and allow the forces of nature to bring something new through us as a collective masculine. And that's my goal and gift. Yeah.
Brilliant. Soma, thank you so much for being here, for the work that you've been stewarding, and for the wisdom that you will no doubt offer today and on Friday as well. I'm very much looking forward to that. Each of you spoke in part to your perception and what you're noticing with men and what they're needing and what might be missing. And I think that this is an interesting trajectory to follow. I wanted to offer just a piece of writing from a book called The Cry for Myth by Rollo May. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's incredibly powerful. But inside this book, he makes a number of great points. And right at the beginning, he speaks about myth. And he says that myth is a way of making sense in a senseless world. Myths are narrative patterns that give significance to our existence. A little bit later, he speaks and says, myths are our self-interpretation of our inner selves in relationship to the outside world. They're narratives by which our society is unified. And what I've been hearing, even in the brief introductions that are offered here, is that there is very much a void. There's a void in the lives of men that has been filled in part by myth, but by many other structures that have gone by the wayside. And so I want to turn this question over to the panel here, and whomever wishes to speak first may do so. What do you think most men are missing? And maybe even as a secondary, that they may not know that they're missing?
I can offer my answer to that one. I think the question is a tough one because it asserts that men are missing something, and it's a bit of a risky place to start. A lot of the conversation I have around men's group kind of starts on that assertion, where people are assuming men are missing something, or there's something wrong with men, or that we need to do something about the way men are. We need to fix things. In particular, actually, this comes up a lot with women, where if I say I'm running a men's circle, a lot of women will be like, "Oh, thank you so much. Men need that." And then I ask them, "Well, what do you think men need? Like, what do you mean when you say that?" Because it's a loaded statement, right? And there's a reason they're sharing that, because they have a personal experience with men that leads them to believe that. So that's why in the beginning I kind of shared that what has led us is the question of what do men need. Again, it comes from the place that men must need something. They wouldn't seek a men's circle if they weren't needing something. So that's kind of like just the foundation, like, for my answer, is like I want to tread that kind of assertion cautiously, because as soon as we assert men are lacking something, we start to fill that gap with our own ideas of what it should be. And Soma made a really beautiful point about how there are some rigid definitions out there of the way men should be and what men are, and I think that all actually comes from a place of this assertion that there's something wrong with men, or there's something men are lacking in who they are, and that their masculinity comes from some identity that they have to hold, very fixed way that they have to replicate, that they, we can point to that guy's masculine, so if we're more like him, we'll be more masculine, rather than it just being like a personal long-standing inquiry that you live your life exploring yourself. So that being said, I think that one of the key ingredients that a lot of men looking for the kind of support that a men's group or a retreat or even coming to a panel like this, a key ingredient that men are seeking is more soul desire, to have a real calling in life, to be pursuing something meaningful. Because without that, everything becomes a lot more confusing. Like, why am I here? Who am I? Identity becomes blurred. Social life becomes vague. Place in the world becomes uncertain. But to have like a real desire to have a creative force moving through you, I think that's something that a lot of men deep down are really yearning for.
Thank you. Nick, I see you unmuted. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to, something that came up that Enrico, I really like that starting point of, there's a narrative out there that we've all heard and other people hear of. There's toxic masculinity, right? And for me, like, that's a non-starter, because I don't think I've ever heard someone say toxic femininity, which is interesting. And you're really not hearing people talk about, let's call it the golden masculine, right? So the masculine is becoming wrong. It's becoming something that's broken, something that is destructive, right? And the masculine lives in women as well, too. And that's something we all need to step into. It's like, this isn't necessarily just a conversation around men. This is a conversation around our collective wholeness and our relationship. And Reko, to kind of piggyback on your point, I think we can look at it two ways. Either we're all perfect and we've just forgot, and it's each of our work to help each other and help ourselves awaken to that or remember that, or we're all broken, and that means that none of us can fix each other. So we've got to pick one lens. It can't be that the feminine is perfect and the masculine is broken, because that's not how duality works. We all know that, right? There's a balance that's at play. Can we say that there's an imbalance? Of course, but I like that place of either we're all broken or we're all perfect. I'm going to live from the place that we're all perfect and we've forgotten. And this is a remembrance, and coming together like this is a chance to hear for the first time of, you know what? Yes, it's so good to hear that. So to answer your question, Oak, I think what men are missing is permission. Permission to speak, permission to feel, permission to express, permission to be vulnerable, and show, hey, I've got feelings, I have pains, I have weaknesses, and they're real. And when we do that, permission to then be seen and then not to be told, oh, but those aren't real pains, or those don't really matter, or those aren't big enough, or let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Well, it's five white guys talking, so your pain doesn't count. And we're not going to win that game. If it's a race to the bottom of who's in the most pain, I don't want to play that game. I don't think anyone here does either. So I think it's for a permission to be vulnerable, to be open. And then ultimately, and maybe what's lacking, is the permission to step into ourselves and our permission to step into our own power and be like, yes, this is who I am. This is why I'm here. This is what my mission in the world is. This is how I'm going to do it. And with that comes such beauty and creation of, we could call it, the mindful masculine or the golden masculine of, like, look what it has to create when it's given permission to be expressed. And that starts within, but it also starts with hearing other men come together and say, guys, it's okay to feel, it's okay to cry, it's okay to be happy, it's okay to succeed. And you can own all these things in a very positive, conscious way. And I even like to refer to like the conscious alpha, where everyone's rising together. And it's not a greater than a less than thing. So yeah, for me, I think that comes from me as men are lacking permission.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'd love to just add another layer. I love what you brought around permission, Nick, and some of the pieces that you touched on around, are we perfect the way that we are? Are we broken? And I guess the way that I hold it is we're all kind of perfectly broken. We've got these wounds that are soul manifested in this lifetime, and those, in my own personal exploration, it's been through the wound, through the brokenness, through the hurt, through the pain, that not only have I discovered more of my wholeness in myself and my own perfection, quote unquote perfection, right? But also it's been the sort of connecting portal through which I can come into relationship with others in a deeper way. And because of our current manifestation of, this, social media and the way that we kind of curate our lives as modern people, and there's a way that uh there's even a manipulation of that, like how can I like be more vulnerable so I can, X, Y, or Z. And I really do my best, and I fail often, but try to lean into those spaces where I can reveal those really difficult things in me, and maybe it's not on social media. I'm not even saying that's the appropriate platform for what I consider to be sacred, sacred wounds. And so I guess there is like a very much a notion that our deepest gifts kind of lie right next to our wounds, our greatest pain and our greatest suffering. One of the first rites of passage experience that I went through, led by a gentleman by the name of Francis Weller, he really spoke to that and led us into that space in such a beautiful way, to be like witnessed in that kind of container with other men, and to be seen in those places, and to really experience that viscerally. Like, this is the thing that I'm like most ashamed of, that I never want anybody to see, that I don't want to reveal. Um and right next to that was like all of my beauty, all of my medicine, all of the gifts that I come into this world bearing. So that's really the piece that I think we miss collectively, culturally, is that we have to, I think we get this idea that we need to curate perfection. And I fall in that trap often, particularly around my incessant need for like self-optimization and personal development. Um, and it's kind of a slippery slope, right? Like there is a beauty in like striving, and it's very much built into the masculine nature. But there's also a beauty into just falling back into who we truly are, remembering, right? Coming back into that true essence. And to me, that's really what's missing, when we're always kind of looking forward into some new version of ourselves, right? We kind of, there's like a form of self-abandonment there. And I think really the journey back into the essential self is really what I'm a big stand for around this work.
Beautifully said, Soma. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Find myself sitting here wondering what to contribute, because it's such beautiful territory all of you are laying out. And I think I'll just follow the thread of what you guys are saying, because I appreciate and agree with a lot of what you're sharing. There, within all of this, there seems to be some sort of consensus that there's a paradox here. And there's this one kind of Zen, I believe it's a Zen Buddhist phrase that you're perfect the way you are, and there's much work to be done. And that those can exist simultaneously. And what that speaks to for me is starting to explore the stories, the myths, the narratives that we're currently living in, often unconsciously, personally, but also collectively, to make that conscious. And through that revelation, we can start making new choices. Because for me, a lot of this work is about recognizing consequence. So we can start dissolving the judgmental classifications of good and bad and right and wrong and success and failure in these very rigid binary ways of looking at it, which can contribute to a lot of shame and guilt and hiding, withdrawal, and trying to adhere to a very cookie cutter representation of how we're supposed to be in order to be good. And tying this back into the title of this gathering here of No More Heroes, of kind of relinquishing this idea that anyone needs to be rescued or saved or fixed. That's actually a contributor, because it's playing into this cultural narrative that has consequence. We're kind of living in the consequence. And within that consequence, there's value to be found. There's insight that can be gleaned. There's healing that's possible. There's recognition of long-standing patterns that have played out down through the generations that we are living in. If we weren't in those consequences, we couldn't recognize what has happened to lead us here, to empower us to make new choices. So I think those things can exist simultaneously. So in terms of what's missing, for me, it comes down to a sense of like a meaningful story. A story that carries some potential of optimism and potential, and approaching that with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to lean into it so that we can learn how to self-disclose what has been true but previously hidden without the automatic response of judgment or ridicule, so that we can start processing the pain from the past and then start creating a new story. So I think this is speaking largely to like a cultural poverty that we're living in right now. And I think a big part of that is the lack of initiatory experiences to really harvest all of these things, which are unconscious driving forces that have huge consequence in our lives, to investigate what are the myths that we're living in and what kind of myths can we draw upon to glean more insight, and then what stories can we create moving forward, knowing what we know now. And I think this is actually a pathway to wisdom. So the wound itself is actually the catalyst for transformation to come into greater resonance with and harmony with thriving life. So I think there's a poem, Rumi or something, where it's like, the crack is where the light comes in. And I think that's what all of you are speaking to in some way, shape, or form, which really resonates with me.
Beautiful, Deus.
Yeah, and there's just one more piece I want to put on there, that, and this is something I've learned from men's work, is, and we could say myth, we could say fear, we could say wounds, but you want to shake hands with these aspects of yourself, and greet it and say, hey, how you doing? Like, I appreciate you for being there where no one else will be, in the deepest, darkest aspects of myself. You love me so much that you're willing to, be the bad energy or be this archetype or whatever. And when you find those pieces, when you stock those pieces in yourself to its work, when you get to it, you shake hands with it, and you give it reverence, because as Soma said, that's where your biggest powers will live. That's where they've been hiding. So once you find those, love those aspects of yourself. Don't make them wrong. Don't make them the bad guy, because they're not.
I'm reminded of a quote from Carl Jung. He said it in Latin, and I still don't know how to pronounce it, but in English it translates to, "In the filth it will be found," which is to say, where we least want to look is where we will find that which we most desire to find. And I think that that's a very powerful piece to remember in relationship to what you've put forward, Nick. In addition to all of your contributions, there's another line from The Cry for Myth by Rollo May that I think is quite meaningful here as a starting point to what I would like to contribute to the conversation, which is, we create and steward myths, but we do not create our need for them. We create and steward myths, but we do not create our need for them. And so when I pose the question, what are men missing? Reko, I appreciated that you illuminated that there was some ambiguity in that question. And we can see it as what is missing from men. And that's where we enter into the paradox of lack, scarcity, imperfection, brokenness as the core quality of masculinity. Or we can ask the question, what is missing for men? That is to say, what, if we were to find it, would serve our purpose of elevating ourselves through and transmuting all of this shadow aspect, this disintegrated, lost, wounded quality of consciousness into that solar, that golden masculine. And as far as I understand it, and has been my experience, myth offers a structure. It's a sense-making technology built into our being that says, just like you were mentioning, Deus, this is the way we can go. This is the path that we can take, at least one of them that is laid out before us. And so to answer my own question, I hadn't thought about it before, but here we are. What I see to be missing for men is vitalized myth that is grounded in the real, it's not that we don't have myth presently. We do. Anyone who would go out to, you know, the latest Avengers movie or superhero theme or likes to read fantasy, you should see my bookshelf. It kind of looks like these, you know, lots of fantasy books. I really appreciate being in that space, and it's a necessary thing to come into contact with. But the difference between when we go and experience these myths inside of popular culture versus when they are ensconcing us culturally in every direction is that we are placed when we commune with a myth that is culturally enacted beyond the movie screen, beyond the novel. And this placement, I think, is really what is missing from men. And this ties directly to your point, Reko, when you were saying the sense of purpose, the sense of meaningful life. Where am I going? What am I doing? And what the heck is it all for? When we are able to commune with myth, we see ourselves in a very varied shade of light. We are able to interpret the symbols, the narrative arcs, and the people in our world in such a way that allows us to identify not only pathways, but mechanisms of interacting and integrating those experiences. So myth would be my answer. What's missing for men is meaningful and vitalized myth.
I think I'll jump in here for a second, just to offer some potential clarifications from my perspective of things. So I think there's a lot of things that can get conflated and kind of lost in the kind of ethereal nature of talking about myth. Like, what is a myth even? You know, we have myths, we have stories, we have parables, we have symbols, we have archetypes, and all of these things kind of merge and are connected in some way, shape, or form. My experience and understanding of myth is like a living transmission of something that's encoded with information. And myths, in that sense, are something that we can hear and explore and feed and discover, but it's also something that we can discover from within, like something that has actually contributed to forming or shaping us in some way. And there are cultural myths that actually contribute to the formation of us as we grow up that nobody is verbally telling us, but there are these belief systems or these kind of like overarching narrative structures that kind of lay the foundation for what reality even is and who we are as people. And then just as an example here, has anyone here read Iron John, the story? Sure. Yeah. Okay, great. So Iron John, if you haven't read it, those of you who are listening, I'd highly recommend it. It's a really beautiful mythic tale of kind of an initiatory pathway for men and masculinity, and women can relate to it in their own way. But just using this as an example, I've read and heard that story many, many times. And every time I investigate that story, I discover something new. There's a new piece of information that jumps out at me based on what's going on inside of me and in the world around me. And so the question there, and one of the questions that we were working with, Ian and myself, at this last retreat that we were at, is, are myths more real than we are? Because they exist before us and they will persist after us, and they also help to shape and inform us. So, like, what is more real, like the human or the myth that we're living in? It seems like this kind of like shaping is kind of how we're built. And just to break this down in a structural way, to make it more tangible, is that this is actually how our brain constructs reality when we're developing. It starts to create associative pathways based on what we're exposed to while we're growing up. It starts very simple with like colors and shapes and textures, and then it starts to add in layers of complexity, and then it starts making meaning from the things that we're being exposed to. So an easy example of this is if I had a really overbearing mother, which was the symbol of woman and feminine, and probably also height and tone of voice and all of these things, I'm going to start automatically associating my feelings towards my mother to any other symbolic representations of that exist in the world. You know, if a woman is abused by a man, they might have a triggered response to all men, because they're a symbolic representation of a story that's being carried inside. So these subjective interpretations, these stories that we're living in actually become some aspect of the objective reality that we're inhabiting on a neurological level, on a psychological level. So it isn't just this airy-fairy, esoteric space over here. It's actually how we are formed and shaped and how we make meaning of the world. So starting to explore myth is a way of literally understanding ourselves. And through that, we can start consciously assigning meaning to different things or renegotiating our relationship to different symbols and stories so that it becomes an act of creation rather than just an automatic playing out of reaction based on the past. The exploration of myth is a way of illuminating the past, the unconscious past that has formed us, so that we can renegotiate those relationships and create something new. And I think that is the territory and the practical value of myth. So I just wanted to throw that in here to this conversation if that feels like a little bit too woo-woo for people who aren't really familiar with this territory.
Brilliant. Brilliant, Deus. Thank you.
Do you mind if I tail onto that? That was, I think, a really great clarification. Sometimes I get into the conversation around myth, and it's just like, myth is big. Let's just assume that, and then I move forward with the specific thing I want to talk about. But that was a really beautiful way of giving some clarification on what it is in that vastness. I've got a great quote for here from Ananda Kumaraswamy. Myth embodies the nearest approach to absolute truth that can be stated in words. And I love that quote because when I think I'll assert that, like, culturally, when we think about the word absolute, we mean fact. It's like specific fact that is an absolute truth. But in the context of this quote, I think what they're describing is like myth, just as Deus was alluding to, is like myth precedes human experience. It's like the territory that the human experience actually moves through, right? Like we move through myth and myth moves through us, but we can't separate ourselves from it. Like our human mind actually operates on the mechanisms that myth, as we describe it, is trying to like create the map of. Stories are maps to the mythological territory, and they're often very vague. If you read like fairy tales or parables and stuff like that, they're generally very vague or very short with very little detail. And the details that are put in are very important, like repetitions. Things will happen 3 times. There will be a blue lily. There will be, there will be, a stream that runs from north to south, right? All of these details are very significant, but there's very few of them compared to, say, reading Tolkien or reading some modern fantasy, which puts in a lot more color and detail and backstory and all that. But so myth, I see myth as like, myth is the terrain or the realm in which the human psyche actually exists, and we can only have our like subjective experience of it. But then using mythology, using stories, helps us to actually broaden out of our own subjective experience and look at the whole thing as it's happening, right? So just as Deus is saying, like there's patterns, there's ways that psychology has helped us to understand, these mechanisms where, because this happened in my childhood, this pattern's repeating in my adulthood. But it's also like many generations of this forever, dating all the way back, because this mythic fabric is what creates the tapestry of all human experience, right? And this is why stories that come from 10,000 years ago are going to be relevant 10,000 years from now. So I wanted to just throw that in, where myth is not actually like not just stories, and it's not just fabrication or I was just watching a documentary that found that there was some of the Arthurian legends actually were able to specify exactly which date he would have existed in, because they put in some details that show that, oh, there's this volcano that erupted during this year, right? Like, so it actually does tell history as well, but because it's mythologized, you know, it tells all of human history.
Well put. Thank you, Reko. I think this draws attention to the difference between the analytical and the analogical. And this is not a conversation or a pair of topics that I hear often discussed, but the analytical is quite common and maybe prioritized and praised amongst the Western mind, particularly amongst men, where we think about reason and logic, the linear, this, therefore, that. We can put it down in some sort of mathematical proof almost. But the analogical is the realm of symbology, metaphor, and analogy. And when we're talking about the terrain of myth as being primary or antecedent to this more analytical human perception, essentially what I derive from that is to say that our capacity to link two images, like you were putting forward, Deus, we start quite rudimentary. Is it warm and red? Is it cold and blue? Is it tall and helpful? Is it small and dangerous? Whatever, all these things that we start to generate these constructs of understanding by linking them together, that's done by analogy. And so when we're looking at the nature of myth and story, even if it's how we talk about our own life, we're using the analogical to encode meaning and to decode meaning. So like you're saying, we can put in historical references. We can put in an understanding of, if you come across a dragon, this is what you ought to do, even if the dragon is your boss or a real tiger or something like this. There's a quality that can be embedded through those specifically woven pieces of symbol, analogy, and metaphor that are really invaluable, genuinely. And we don't find them anywhere else unless we are in the realm of the mythopoetic, in the symbolic, in this mythic linguistic landscape. So I appreciate you adding that. We're coming to the last 10 minutes here. I would love to open the floor to our listeners here. If there's anyone who has questions or comments or want to bring voice, Cedar, Zach, Cosmos, you're welcome to add your voices to the conversation here. And a final thank you to the speakers as well for everything that was discussed on this topic.
Sure. I'll go first. Thank you very much for opening up this event. This was really insightful. I've been doing a lot of men's work with the Mankind Project recently, and I'm navigating a way to create a bridge for Indigenous communities, because I feel like this is a mostly non-Indigenous community. And I don't know if that's exactly by design through residential schools and the systemic oppression, but I think it's important to find groups that are sincere in a mature masculine that doesn't vilify the feminine. So I feel like you guys demonstrated that this morning, and thank you for opening it up and letting me speak.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate that very much. It's definitely the case that a lot of the most popular pieces that we see in terms of men's work are, from my experience, lacking a meaningful diversity, which is painfully ironic given that many of the indigenous traditions, at least where I live and those that I have the privilege of learning, are the ones who understand the veracity and necessity of myth. And so there's such a well of knowledge here that we have witnessed destroyed, is no word other than that. And I think now more than ever, the intention of reconciliation and elevating Indigenous voices will only serve not only the collective of men who are working to come into this mythic evolution, but our society as a whole. So thank you for adding that. Either Cito or Cosmos, did you want to contribute anything?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you for all of you, those of you who shared. I've really appreciated this conversation, and look forward to hearing each of you speak as we go further into this material. The thing that I'm aware of as I listen to you speak is how the individual context and the cultural context informs the myths that we have personally and collectively about ourselves. And we are in the realm also of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And we're in the realm of ontology. And so the Western project, which is in somewhat in decline right now on a cultural level, is built of a number of myths. And a lot of you are referencing Carl Jung, which I really appreciated, or referencing work that has been inspired by Carl Jung, perhaps a dominant shaman in our Western tradition. And as you do, you're circulating around that central point, which is how do we have agency as we uncover these myths, as we work with these myths, as we discover how they're relevant to our lives individually and collectively. How do we have agency within them? And so that's where I really look forward to the conversation moving. And I appreciate as well the lens that you're putting on this conversation that moves to the way in which Indigenous cultures are also part of these myths, our own Indigenous cultures and the Indigenous cultures that we share space with and we share landscape with. So that situates the conversation in time and place, which I think is really important. So thank you. I look forward to continuing, and it'll be an exciting series of talks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cedar. If there are no other questions or comments here, I'd like to extend my thanks once again. Looks like my video died here. I'd like to extend my thanks once again to Deus, Reko, Nick, and Soma for agreeing to be a part of this panel and part of the speakers group for No More Heroes. Thank you, Cedar, Zach, and Cosmos for showing up today, and I look forward to seeing you again throughout the week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Oak. Thanks, everyone.
You bet.
Yeah, great.
There,
Good to be here. Great conversation. Loved hearing everybody's wisdom, perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks, Oak.
excellent. And for those who are interested, Alex King Harris is going to be offering a talk on reworking personal myth and ritualizing daily life, which starts in about 5 or so minutes here. Thanks
Alex
for the
is great.
message, Cosmos. Yeah.
Alex is great. He's the only two-time guest on my podcast so far, by the way. I love
Right.
hearing him speak.
Excellent, excellent. Beautiful. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to stick around in the room. Thank you so much, and we'll all see each other again soon. And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you could like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.